practice corporeal politics, get out into the real world and build things with other people, semicolon, get a library card.
Hello, and welcome to the Negative Space podcast presented by the Anthem Awards. I'm Patricia McLoughlin, the Anthem Awards General Manager, and also your host. We have 7 cause areas that make up the Anthem Awards, and today we're digging into education, art, and culture, and the ongoing challenges with censorship and book bans across the United States. During the 2023-24 school year, PEN America reported 10,046 instances of book bans in schools. These bans are happening in 29 states, and 220 public school districts are also seeing this, with Florida and Iowa with the greatest number of bans. Brooklyn Public Library has been pivotal in fighting this censorship with their Books Unbanned program for students and their Anthem and Webby award-winning podcast, Borrowed and Banned. Today, I'm thrilled to be chatting with the Chief Librarian of Brooklyn Public Library, Nick Higgins.
Hi, Patricia. How are you? Thank you so much for inviting me in.
Doing great. We're so excited to have you here with us today. And I mean, to just really hop into things, I need to know, how did you become a librarian, which I feel like is so many people dream jobs growing?
Yeah, dream job. I didn't know it was my dream job growing up, but I spent an awful lot of time in libraries. We moved around a lot in the upper Midwest, and at each new town that we would drop into, my parents were kind enough to drop me off at the library. And I didn't realize it at the time, as you don't when you're growing up, but it had a tremendous impact on me being in spaces, particularly in new towns where I didn't know anyone. Being dropped into spaces where I immediately felt comfortable entering into that profession would give me an opportunity to work with all sorts of people from all different backgrounds, all different ages and points of view. And there was something quite beautiful and just sort of like straightforward about that, about sort of getting to know the community in a way that I hadn't before. So I applied to the Brooklyn Public Library. There was this program that was a grant-funded trainee program that sounded really interesting, and it would allow me to have a full-time job at the library, and the library would also pay for part of my schooling to get my master's degree in librarianship. Every 3 months or so, I'd rotate around to a different branch library here in Brooklyn, which was so educational for me. I mean, if you live in Brooklyn or live in the city, like your entire world is basically 5 blocks, and you can get whatever you need. You don't really need to leave your neighborhood, which is, part of the appeal of living here, but also part of its limitations. You can get kind of provincial. But being able to rotate around to one of our 62 locations in Brooklyn, like every 3 months, I got to know what people in Bay Ridge kind of came to the library for, which was different set of needs than was expressed in, say, Cypress Hills. It was different than Canarsie, and every place that I landed, like I realized that the role of the librarian that I was training to become required me to be very nimble and creative in how I approached people's different needs as they were coming through the door. And every time the door would open, a new need would come in, and I had to figure out how to keep on opening doors for people. And I thought, man, that was amazing sort of experience for me, coming up through the system and being able to be in that space and to learn about Brooklyn in a way that I never learned about Brooklyn before. That's a long way of saying that, becoming a librarian allowed me to learn more about this borough that I love.
That's awesome. And I think that's such an interesting way to think about New York too, is these are places that are scattered all throughout the city, and they really do help show kind of the culture of the different neighborhoods.
For sure, definitely.
And I'm curious as well, being a librarian kind of in this current climate, how has your work changed a little bit as we've seen book bans start being a thing and as censorship has grown in popularity, and now as well as we enter into a new administration?
Yeah, those are all really significant questions. And I think not only for me as a librarian here in Brooklyn, which we enjoy a certain amount of protection from what's happening perhaps in other parts of the country, colleagues and friends who are really struggling right now. it's still impactful for us here because we're Brooklyn Public Library, so we enjoy a certain amount of kind of flexibility in what we do. We're definitely we stand for intellectual freedom, and we're not banning books in the city. But that also leaves us with a tremendous amount of responsibility to step up and find ways to support people who aren't so lucky or fortunate in their communities. So in 2022, at the early part of that year, we, along with a bunch of other people, of course, sort of noticing that there was a rise in book bans, more than we'd ever seen before. And it was, paying attention to this because not only was it happening at the grassroots level in places, in smaller towns in Florida or Texas, Oklahoma, places like that, where individuals or groups of individuals would come to a school board meeting and cause a significant disruption to the proceedings by challenging a book, shouting down administrators and educators. We were hearing stories about librarians being shouted down across reference desks, again, sort of at the local community level where that was happening, and that was troubling enough. And finding there were thousands of new challenges and bans being reported to the American Library Association and Penn America, that was really alarming. But there's also this parallel kind of pull at the state level. So you'd have states like Florida and Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, who were essentially codifying censorship in state legislation. So bills would be pushed through state legislatures that were similar to other bills that were being pushed through other state legislatures, which would be basically librarian criminalization bills, anti-CRT bills, divisive concepts, laws that were being put in place, bills that would essentially make it, a crime, or at least penalized or prohibited to distribute and make available reading material to young people in schools and public libraries in the entire state. So there was troubling kind of trend of people disrupting sort of like the normal operations of a school board meeting or a library and demanding that books be pulled from the shelves. And then it was being supported at the state level, which kind of motivated us to figure out if there's like some way that we could subvert those efforts, with power that we had as a big library organization here in New York City.
And I know one of those big initiatives that you guys had was kind of speaking about this very publicly through the Borrowed and Banned podcast series. In that process, your team spoke with a bunch of different students and teachers and librarians. And I'm curious to know how you guys found that these bans are really impacting these groups, and especially the educators that are finding themselves stuck in really difficult situations.
Yeah, educators, librarians, students, even, they didn't sign up for any of this. It's harassment. It's anti-democratic. There are processes in place in schools and libraries where parents do, in fact, have choice on what their children can and can't read, depending on like their own sort of value systems. But what's happening right now are individuals who are essentially determining what other families and other students are allowed or not allowed to read. So that's one thing. By trying to codify some of this into law, first of all, that subverts essentially the professionalism or the professional sort of standards that librarians and educators aspire to, they train for, and it's putting those decisions about what content is available for students into a small group of people who shouldn't have any sort of business choosing books for young people. The impact is really demoralizing, particularly for librarians who, again, didn't sign up for this. They're spending a lot of their times addressing, a multitude of challenges that are coming in at them. They're busy enough. Educators, teachers are also busy enough trying to educate, groups of children who are running, coming through their classrooms. And now they have to deal with pushing back on these bans that might be coming in from parents or adults who don't even live in the community. So it's, again, demoralizing if there are sort of laws in place in states that make it a misdemeanor or a felony to provide obscene, quote unquote, obscene or obscene material to young people. Like, it has an effect. I mean, people are being pushed out of the profession. People's time, teachers' time is being spent dealing with these issues rather than focusing in on educating our kids and the students. And for the students, because the bands and challenges are really focused in largely on books that are written by Black authors or featuring stories, narratives about LGBTQ plus individuals. Like, it's really narrowly focused in on particular people. So we always say it's not necessarily about the book. It's not the book that's being removed. It's really the person's story. It's like a symbol for who belongs in the community and who does not. So you're talking about a kid who might, in their entire world, there's only a handful of places where they feel comfortable and supported. And even in those spaces, they're being told that their story doesn't belong and they don't belong. And there's something obscene about who they are, just by the virtue of like them, like the books that are important to them being taken off the shelves. So it's really having an impact on, not only sort of like the practical application of just like, trying to teach children in our classrooms, but also on the morale of, our communities, like just understanding, sort of like putting boundaries around what's acceptable and what's not, and boundaries around, who's acceptable and who's not.
Yeah, and it breaks your heart to think about kids thinking of themselves in that type of way through something like this. And a stat that we found is that 47% of the titles reported banned in 2023 were about BIPOC or queer narratives. And it's crazy to see that this censorship is only growing in scale. And so,
Mm.
curious too, what does it look like to kind of fight this erasure? And how do we keep these stories alive and have these children and communities continue to feel supported?
Yeah, it's a tough question because a lot of these levers are being pulled at the same time, at the state level and at the grassroots level, quote unquote grassroots level, from groups that are fairly well supported and funded and connected. So it's not necessarily grassroots, but it's strategic. So how do you support young people? I can talk a little bit about how Brooklyn Public Library entered into this and understood that we have a responsibility and we have the ability to intervene on behalf of young people who are at the business end of some of these attacks. So in 2022, we launched this program, Books Unbanned, as you mentioned earlier, which is a freedom to read initiative that supports young people anywhere in the country, age 13 to 21, who's facing a ban or a challenge in their communities and want to do something about it. They can simply write us an email or send us a message and tell us what's going on. And we send them a free digital library card to the Brooklyn Public Library. And with that card, they can access over 500,000 ebooks and audiobooks in our collection. And that's the entire collection. It's not just banned books. So we're not just offering, books that are banned, but it's just sort of like, on the surface, it's sort of like an intervention that counteracts the local censorship that they're facing in their communities. But underneath the hood, it's really sort of a demonstration of what a public institution should be for the people. Like, just like you can come in and read whatever you want. We don't really necessarily care what you want to read. You as a person, as a human being, have rights to access information that you want to access and the stories that you want to consume. So have at it. You can have access to all of our collections and read whatever you like. And so we distributed well over 10,000 library cards to young people in every state across the country. The stories that are coming in, of course, speak of isolation, marginalization, seeing that their whole identities being negated in a community that should be set up to support them. So as you say, it's heartbreaking. How do you even with our intervention, like we understand it's almost like kind of like an emergency room visit, so we can help you out right now. Like, here's a library card. We know that you're going through some stuff and take advantage of this. But what we're really trying to think about is how to work with other people to change the environment around that young person. So eventually it's sort of like a public health lens. Like, you won't need the emergency room visit, down the road. It's sort of like, how do you create better environments for young people that are more open, they're more pluralistic, they're more aspirationally together and community minded, so that young person or the young person that comes up behind them isn't feeling the same sense of isolation and marginalization. That's a little bit of a trickier one. Like, how do you connect people that are kind of all over the map, literally. And we have started to partner with organizations like PEN America and the National Coalition Against Censorship, and working to create networks and cohorts of young people across the country. We have 10,000 young people who are part of Books Unbanned now. They have library cards. So what we do, we try to connect those young, like groups of kids in Texas, with groups of kids in California, with groups of kids in Oklahoma and Idaho and New York. I mean, kids in New York, they're like, I didn't even know there's censorship that's happening across the country. Like, who knew? But connecting them with other cohorts of peers to talk about ways that they can strengthen their advocacy skills so they can become, hopefully, aspirationally the next leaders of their own communities, and then build the communities that they want to live in better.
I love that. And that's such an incredible way to just use the digital age that we're in to connect people and give them access to resources that they don't have otherwise, whether it's that in a lot of these cases too, I'm sure some of their schools don't have a huge selection of books, or they might not be able to always take things home in that way. So having access in this way is really wonderful. And kind of going back to the role of the librarian in all of this, I know recently a librarian was fired in Arkansas after she spoke out against the suppression of certain books from readers. And in this moment, how are librarians handling this? And
Yeah.
is the price of really standing your ground and standing up for your beliefs if you're in one of these areas?
Yeah, and that librarian incidentally is actually suing the state of Arkansas. So there are moments of even with all of this swirling around us. I mean, there's certainly a lot of people out there who are at the business end of like these attacks, professionals who spent their entire career serving students and the public, who are being forced out of their jobs, whether by intimidation or just by being fired outright. And, I don't begrudge anyone for not wanting to stand up and push back. I mean, you're oftentimes just pushing back against the full weight and power of the state itself. And I can understand that's like it's hugely intimidating, disorienting, and traumatic. But there are folks who are standing up and pushing back, particularly this librarian in Arkansas, for instance, an educator in Oklahoma, Norman, Oklahoma, Summer Bamier. Amanda Jones in Louisiana, for instance, is also pushing back against some of her harassers. But it's not just the individual, it's also like the institutions that are rallying around them. In Little Rock, Arkansas, for instance, the director of the Arkansas library, the Little Rock, Arkansas library, Nate Coulter, is leading a lawsuit, or led a lawsuit against the state of Arkansas for imposing an anti or criminalization, librarian criminalization bill, pro censorship bill. And he, along with several other plaintiffs, including a teenager and their mom, as a group of plaintiffs, pushed back against the state of Arkansas. And the judge just ruled last month in the library's favor and against the state in a very stout and robust decision. That will certainly be appealed, of course, by the state of Arkansas, but there are moments of light, or there's sort of examples of light that are peeking through, whether it's in Little Rock, Arkansas, whether it's Amanda Jones' case in Louisiana being reheard and retried, Escambia County in Florida, that there are sort of, again, individuals, activists who are sort of in the middle of this tornado, being supported by institutions like the ACLU, for instance, or National Coalition Against Censorship, who are really pushing back and testing the constitutionality of some of these laws that are being established in states. And I would say too that the folks who are passing these laws, or at least trying to pass them through the state legislatures, they probably understand that they don't hold constitutional, they don't have constitutional grounding per se. And I think that they're okay, because I think that like once they get challenged and they get, reversed, or like they get thrown out, the damage has already been done. I think that part of it is just sort of intimidating, people from stepping out in the first place. So if you're in a state like Missouri, where, there's a librarian, criminalization bill, on the books already, even though that it doesn't have any constitutional, standing or grounding, and it will be challenged and probably reversed or whatever, like, in the meantime, you might be less inclined to, make the book display that you want to make or provide books to young people that you find that are actually appropriate for them, but fear some sort of retribution or penalization from the state. So it's like the chilling effect is really what I think, the strategy and the point is of all of this. And I think it's working, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing where the public is finding a lot of ground here is that they're creating a sense of fear around this. And
Mm.
how do you think we can start to fight the idea that books are dangerous? And especially, I think, in a day and age where the internet's available and kids can
Yeah.
access a lot of extreme information with just a click. But why are we villainizing books?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, again, like I think the book is just a vehicle for something that's a little bit like, again, under the hood, there's something else going on, which is really about this sort of like this question about who belongs and who doesn't. So take away the narratives that really describe, queer experiences, Black experience, like, and then you signal to people in your community that they don't have any, or they have less political sort of authority or possibility or aspirations within your community or standing. And books are dangerous. Books are dangerous. They're dangerous, from a particular point of view. So a lot of this is really about, if it's being driven, if book bans right now are about marginalizing people who already have sort of like trouble getting their stories sort of elevated,
Mhm.
then that's, I don't know. There's something here about the protection of a certain group of people, enshrining those rights for particularly like white and heteronormative, folks who, if political power increases for other people in the community, then they look at it as though their political power or standing diminishes. And that's not really how the real world works, but that's how fear sort of works, and sort of how you come to these sort of like moral panics about, what's right for kids and what's wrong for kids. When, a moral panic comes up, it's usually around, obscenity of material and sort of protecting, a certain group of young people. And that group of young people is primarily, again, white and heteronormative. So you keep everyone else out. You enshrine the rights for a certain amount of people by eroding the rights for other people. And I think that's really what this is about. And books, yeah, I mean, books can challenge that. I mean, that's how we sort of, see, what's possible for, for who we are, who we identify with. Um, it creates a roadmap for possibilities and engaging in the communities that we want to live in and we want to build together. And if you marginalize or eliminate those particular stories, then in one sense you're getting, then people won't know that that's even possible, and perhaps that will never become possible because the roadmap's not there. And that's, I think, what's really going on here, and why it's so pernicious and perhaps even different than some of the book banning examples that we've had throughout history. That this one takes on a particular personal, almost individual tone to it, that is really targeted at particular people and eroding their rights in favor for a smaller group of people.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's gone so much past the Judy Blume headlines at this point in time where it really feels like much greater sense of erasure. And so I know we already talked a bit about the Books Unbanned program, but I'm curious too what else you've kind of seen happening, from teacher collectives to digital archives and just some unique avenues that people are taking to move this forward and to really fight these book bans.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, yes, like teachers collectives. There's FREADOM, freedom fighters in Texas, who are a group of school librarians who got together and decided to build a coalition of professionals to push back against different laws in Texas that were pro-censorship laws and intimidation that people were feeling in at the school level. The Panther Anti-Racist Union that popped up out of York County in Pennsylvania was driven by young people, students who were pushing back against the school that was proposing banning over 300 books in their school library. And together with a couple of faculty advisors, were successful in motivating the public to come out in protest and in support of access to these books on behalf of the students, which basically was one of the movements that inspired us to actually get off our chairs and start to do something here in Brooklyn, being motivated by the will and the efforts of young people was really important. I've been seeing, some folks like community members who are popping up, sort of like banned books, kind of like giveaways in different places and different communities. At like an ice cream shop or like in a bookstore in Texas, where young people can come in and get books for free. I think about this a lot now, particularly with this new administration, that we're going to need to be a little bit more creative in addressing some of these concerns and getting to people in ways that aren't necessarily traditional or within the systems that we thought were there to support us, because the systems that were there to support us are now being, as we can see with the Department of Education and other places in federal government, being co-opted and actually kind of, again, sort of they're evolving or devolving into their sort of like newspeak sort of shadow almost. And so we can't necessarily rely on the support that we once had from those particular agencies or those particular institutions. So we need to figure out different ways to get information into the hands of people, to help people organize in ways that are maybe, I don't want to say surreptitious, because maybe we're not there yet, but just sort of, outside of the systems, or create new systems for it. Maybe that's what we should be saying. So, for instance, the Little Free Library, I had no idea that like this year they're going to celebrate their 200,000th like Little Free Library that's been established in the United States, which blows my mind. And I see them around and
Wow.
and whatnot, and they seem to pop up everywhere. And there's an idea possibly of just like being able to reach people at the street level in communities that we necessarily, like here in Brooklyn, we do, we're not in Paducah, Kentucky, we're not in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, we're not in Kirksville, Missouri, but like Little Free Library is. And there's something about activating spaces, multiple spaces in a community that are really focused in on literacy and reading and bringing together readers together, no matter where they are, and saturating a community. That Little Free Library, I think, does pretty well. And I'm wondering if there's, again, just sort of like open thinking about this, that if there's like a network of sort of points that you can reach people in different ways that aren't sort of like the traditional ways that we might have otherwise gone to. So just throwing it out there, that it's going to take a lot of creativity in finding new ways to push back in ways that we haven't thought about before. And I see some of it coming up again through student activism, through teacher collectives and things like that you mentioned. But what else is there, and how do we move from the despair of the moment toward action?
Yeah. And I think at this moment in time too, we see so much of this organizing happening online and on
Yeah.
platforms like TikTok, and kids just coming together and learning about these issues in new ways that they might not even be aware of yet. So it's really wonderful to see people just start coming together and having bigger conversations about this.
Yeah, and you mentioned online, and I think there's something to be said about coming together in person and really supporting spaces that already exist in the community. And I'm biased here, but like a public library that is really set up for people of all different backgrounds to come to, and experiences and abilities or whatever, to like come together and in person build things together. um, I think that, listen, in this world that is sort of designed to be a distraction, up to and including like the phones that we carry in our pockets. I mean, there's something about, being in a space with someone where you're together in person and you're almost sort of kind of pushed toward accepting or assuming the other person's inherent dignity, like just by being in that space and like sharing the resources around you, being responsible for the other person. Um, and those spaces are fairly rare. And I think, listen, if, book banning is not about books. It's about, deciding who belongs and who doesn't. It's also about the erosion of public institutions like libraries. I mean, the overall pernicious effect year over year is like a funding cut for a library this year and maybe a deeper one next year because the community thinks that they're distributing pornography to kids, which is not true, but that gets into the national conversation or the local conversation, and that becomes a dominant narrative, and then funding decreases again, and then you're letting go staff, and then maybe one of your buildings closes and that sort of thing, and then all of a sudden, like, you're in this environment where you don't have a public library anymore. And those spaces where you can get together with people that you might not have otherwise had a chance to bump into or interact with because, like, there are inaccessible spaces out there, but a public library accepts everyone and welcomes everyone. And all of a sudden you lose that. You lose a significant building block of democratic society by losing those kinds of spaces and those opportunities to meet people and build with people. So online, absolutely, but getting used to getting back in person, and again, working together in person, I think is really important.
And I think something I want to call out too is so often people think of their public libraries as just a place to get books, and that is not it at all. I know where I
Yeah.
grew up in our library, we have bird watching. There are authors that are regularly visiting. There's so much happening to get involved with and to be with your community through.
Sure.
I'm curious what you guys have kind of going on, coming up, things to look forward to this spring.
Oh my goodness. We're a network of, we're a branch library system of 62 library spaces. We just opened up an arts and culture library in the cultural district in downtown Brooklyn, that will be the site of all sorts of performances and exhibitions that map onto the cultural output of not only that community in Brooklyn, which is, sort of like the arts kind of district, but beyond, throughout Brooklyn, as a site where people can experience that. We have, again, we've got all sorts of things for young people that are happening, whether it's multi, like, spanning over like several months, a robotics competition for young people to get involved in. We have a podcast series, of course, that's going to be coming up again, coming up pretty soon, sparking a national conversation about books that's changed America. So that's the theme there. But the thing that's really appealing about a public library is that they are literally for everyone. I mean, we've gotten letters from all sorts of people, thousands and thousands of letters from people all across the United States, writing into us to learn a little bit about our intellectual freedom, our freedom to read initiatives, Books Unbanned in particular. And oftentimes they're young people who are looking for a library card and, some sort of like kind sort of response from a caring adult. And that's what we provide, and we give that. But we also get a lot of letters from adults who tell us that they haven't been to a library since they were kids or ever at all. And they talk about how they want to support the program because even though they haven't been to a library in a very long time or ever, they understand what's at stake here. Again, it's that sort of like that it's like if they woke up the next, like, tomorrow morning and their library was gone, there would be something at the heart of the way that they want their communities to be built that was gone. And they understand it as sort of like, this is, the erosion of democracy, of our pluralistic aspirations. I mean, sometimes they don't like talk about it that way. I talk about it that way, but it's about how your community is organized. And that's what's at stake here. And I think, as you mentioned, where you grew up or your library, they have like bird watching and they've got like musical instrument lending and all that kind of thing. Like we all of these libraries have that because we're responsive to our communities. Like, we are one of those rare institutions that are sort of like with you from the moment you're born to old age. And it's almost like you can develop this relationship with this institution across a lifetime. And what other institution is there like that? I mean, it's this longitudinal relationship building. It's really special. It's really important. And that's why I feel like we've inherited all this goodwill in libraries. Like, year over year, people are like, yeah, we love libraries. Even though I don't go to a library, like, everyone has like a library origin story. Like, yeah, when I was a kid, like, went to the library, I felt safe, and there's a librarian and whatever. They gave me the book that changed my life or whatever. But I haven't been to the library in a long time. But there's such good feeling about it, and I think that's what's also disoriented about this whole thing. That librarians are like, how is this culture war coming to our doorstep? Like, why? like, we're not ready for it because like everyone loves us. Like, why is this happening? Why are we being attacked? Um, yeah, it's hard for people to be in that environment. Like we said earlier in the conversation, like we didn't sign up for this. We read books to kids and we go bird watching with you. And we have like groups of older adults coming in to learn how to debate one another on current topics. And we have robotics competitions and we teach people how to read. And so it's something that again makes it more pernicious that there's an element of our society out there who looks at institutions like that are shared by everyone in their community, and that those are on the chopping block, that they should be taken away. It concerns me a great deal, but also inspires me and others here at Brooklyn Public Library and libraries across the United States to stand up and redouble our efforts to really support people who are suffering the most. Again, here in Brooklyn, we're very strong and even protected in a way.
Hmm.
So that just means that we need to redouble our efforts to make sure that we're reaching people who aren't so lucky.
And what is the best way for people to be supporting the libraries? Is it donations? Is it just showing up? What can we really be doing
Yeah.
for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like you need to engage. Like listen, go to a library. If you haven't been to a library in a long time, just go get a library card and talk to the people who are working there. Again, it's about relationship building. It's a building, of course, but it has people inside it who are going to be there for the long haul. And that building will, hopefully will be there across a lifetime too. And it's important. It's a physical embodiment of what undergirds our U.S. Constitution and like the First Amendment rights. Like it's all sort of captured there in that space. So go and find out about it. Like engage with it, become a member of that library. Ask the staff there how you can get involved. Have your meetings there. Like bring people to the library. Use it as a space. Go to a library board meeting and find out what they're doing. Find ways to support it that way. Yeah, write a check. Perfect. Great. If you see that there's like a vote for the library funding this year, learn about the library a little bit more and support them that way with your vote. It's really important to show up. Again, talking about it's like being out in the world with people is really important, and the library can provide that.
Awesome. And I also feel like while I have you, I have to ask for at least one book recommendation. And so I'm curious if there anything recently that you've read that has really inspired you that like you were like, I need to hand this off to someone immediately.
Oh, the inspired like so I've been trying to in times like this. Listen, I go back to some how to walk through the world at this particular moment in time. So I'll go back to like Timothy Snyder, for instance, like on tyranny, like 20 steps, like 20 things that you can do to sort of, live in this world of, ascendant authoritarianism. I'm getting bleak here a little bit, but so Timothy Snyder, a little bit more hopeful. Rebecca Solnit. Rebecca Solnit is a writer that people need to read. That hope is practice, that you need to it's not a guarantee. It's not, blind optimism that we're just sort of like everything's going to be okay. It actually takes work and collective action and learning about what your neighbors are doing. I've also been reading a lot of Rick Perlstein, who writes these doorstopper books about the 1960s and like basically the creation of the birth of American conservatism. And he does it really well. And also sort of it's not inspiring necessarily, but it's very instructive that this came from somewhere and it was like a slow build over time. And there were certain things that were put in place to make this moment cogent, at least to me. And having some sort of understanding helps sort of break through some of the chaos that I think we're being conditioned to respond to at all times. Not very inspiring list other than the Solnit, but hopefully that'll do.
No, I love it. To wrap things up, what is just one reminder that you would like to leave the audience?
Okay, one sentence is tough. I mean, listen. So I'll go back to Timothy Snyder, and this is sort of like the theme that we've been talking about. Practice corporeal politics. Get out into the real world and build things with other people. Semicolon. Get a library card.
I love it. Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. This was amazing and really like a love letter to public libraries and has just really filled my cup today. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for inviting me on and for the attention to this really important topic.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow, rate, like, and subscribe wherever you are watching or listening. The 5th Annual Anthem Awards will be opening for entries on Tuesday, April 8th. If your work or passion is having an impact, we would love to see it entered this year. For more information about the Anthem Awards, you can visit us online at anthemawards.com and at Anthem Awards on social. Thank you to our production and editorial team, including Sugebo, Jordana, Jarrett, and Kate Mishkin. Thank you again for listening. I'm Patricia McLoughlin, and this was The Negative Space.